This is the story of the British promise that led to the destruction of Palestine and the creation of the State of Israel.
People asking the question, does Israel have the right to exist? Israel, Zionists, Eastern European Jews claim Israel as a holy land. I want you to ask yourself, what has Israel done since it has had its status as a nation and has had the ability to obtain and build military-grade weapons? What has they done? They have support the most evilest genocidal regimes by supplying them with weapons, such as South Africa was supplied with weapons from Israel when every other country had boycotted South Africa. For these Eastern European Zionist Jews to claim Israel as a holy land, how is it that they lack a moral compass? How is it that they do not have the empathy that they once benefited from that caused people to do World War II in order to get them out of concentration camps and end their slaughter? Why do they lack that empathy when it comes to their own treatment of the Palestinians? Why did they not have the empathy for the apartheid that blacks was going through in South Africa? Yet these Eastern European Jews want to claim Israel as a holy land, but they have no moral compass. Does the Holocaust exempt Israel from the United Nations official Genocide Prevention and Responsibility to Protect Act?
On November 2nd, 1917, Britain's Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour wrote a letter that would set off a conflict still being fought more than 100 years later.
His Majesty's government view with favour the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people and will use their best endeavours to facilitate the achievement of this object.
Does Israel have a right to exist under Zionist European Jews occupation when it was decided by British officials? Not the people who actually stayed in that land or people who have DNA ties to that land. However, but based off a political decision to give Zionist Jews from Eastern Europe their own homeland.
When Balfour wrote of his government's intent to create a Jewish homeland in Palestine, 90% of the people living there were not Jewish. Just 31 years later, most of them were gone.
How is this not a white Zionist European Eastern Jewish occupation of another people's homeland while committing genocide? How is this any different than what Hitler did to Jews in Europe? Is it because they're not using buildings to put them in the burn? Extermination is still extermination. Genocide is still genocide. What Israel has done with its military power is committed genocide of the people who existed there prior to their arrival. I must ask, does that Holocaust exempt Israel as a member of the United Nations from being held to these standards? Because why have Israel been allowed to commit genocide over a 50-year period against the present Palestinians? Why have Israel been allowed to create open-air prisons in Palestine? Why have Israel been exempt for their participation in supporting apartheid and genocide governments such as South Africa. Does the Holocaust exempt Zionist Jews from any responsibility for their actions? My name is Antonio. My page is Unapologetically Black. I ask that you like and subscribe to the page and share this message. Remember, black people being forced into these shanty towns and being over-policed in their communities by these white oppressors were armed by Israel. The violence that was committed upon these blacks are on the hands of Israel. Israel recesses supply arms to South Africa. Under pressure from both the United States Congress and American Jews, Israel is recessing its arms and trade relationship with South Africa. Israel officials and foreign policies experts says whether the reassessment will end up with Israel adopting sanctions against South Africa, however, will depend on outcome of a struggle now taking place in a policy-making establishment. The most pressing factor is the Comprehensive Anti-Apartheid Act passed by Congress on October 2nd, 1986, which decreed that by April 1st, 1987, the president must receive a report from the State Department that will outline other nations' arms sales to South Africa with a view towards ending military assistance with countries engaged in the trade. Jason. What occurred is when Israel received its statehood, it was allowed to obtain military-grade weapons and allowed to produce military-grade weapons due to the UN. And with this, after leaving the Holocaust, Zionist Jews from Eastern Europe who had seized control of Israel supply weapons to a South African apartheid. I'm saying people who have left, people who have so-called left the Holocaust, saying that they were slaughtered, leave Europe, then places Palestinians in open prisons, consist with policies that contribute to an ongoing genocide and the displacement of a whole group of people. However, they're trying to claim this land under a spiritual, moral high ground. Does Israel, under Zionist Jews' rules, have a right to exist? No. It is just another case of Europeans colonizing and committing genocide on another group of people of color. This is what the Zionist Jewish movement is. The Zionist Jewish movement is genocide. And they have shown you repeatedly that these Jews have no moral or spiritual compass. They have used their position as a nation under the UN to weaponize terrorist nations.
Let's start with the obvious question. Why were the British making promises about other people's countries? The short answer: empire is one hell of a drug. This was World War I, and the British were making lots of promises. In addition to promising a Jewish homeland in Palestine, they promised Arab leaders independence if they rose up against Britain's enemy, the Ottoman Empire. The Arabs did. Hollywood even made a movie about it.
Arabia's for the Arabs now. That's what I've told them anyway. That's what they think. That's why they're fighting.
Oh, surely.
A month after Balfour's letter, British troops took Palestine, ending 400 years of Ottoman rule. The people who lived there were Arabs, mostly Muslims, but there were Christian and Jewish minorities too. There was also a tiny number of European Jews who in the late 1800s had started building small colonies there. At a time when many Jews were suffering horrific persecution in Europe, they felt Palestine could be an escape. The idea of building up...
Can I ask you what makes that different from the English settlers that came to America? Did they not come in small enclaves set up? Did the natives not allow them to do so peacefully, and then they ended up conquering and taking over? What is the difference? Can you see the parallel in these European behavior? Does Israel have a right to exist under European Zionist Jews? No.
A Jewish presence in Palestine became known as Zionism, but it stayed a fringe movement among European Jews. Many of them felt they shouldn't have to leave their countries to avoid persecution. But Zionism as...
It's clearly ironic that millions and millions and millions of Palestinians had to flee Palestine for fear of persecution, and because of the way they have established the West Banks and divided them to the point where they don't have access to food, they don't have access to produce things for themselves. It is ironic that a group of people who fled Europe leaving persecution has persecuted another group of people for 50 years. Why I say Israel does not have the right to exist under European Zionist Jews is because under European Zionist Jews, Israel is a godless place. They felt they should not have to leave their countries in Europe. They understand that they are Europeans. They understand that they are Jewish converts, not by blood.
A political movement took a big step forward with an Austrian man called Theodor Herzl. And this guy is a very important name in this story. In 1896, he published Der Judenstaat, or in English, The Jewish State. In it, he said the only way for Jews to avoid Europe's anti-Semitism was not just to leave, but to have their own country. And Herzl didn't just write. The next year, he organized a conference in Basel, Switzerland, the first Zionist Congress. The attendees agreed on a program which sought, among other things, to establish a Jewish homeland in Palestine and promote Jewish settlement in Palestine. From here on out, the Zionist movement became very active, setting up funds to promote...
Now be clear about this. This was pre-World War II. This was prior to Hitler doing mass slaughter of the Jews in Europe. So they had already made preparations to take over Israel or Palestine. So what would force countries to push forward this plan to give Israel or give Palestine to European Zionist Jews would be World War II.
Jewish immigration to Palestine, companies to buy land there, and recruiting representatives to advocate for their cause with different governments. A few days after the conference, Herzl wrote this in his diary.
At Basel, I founded the Jewish state. In 5 years perhaps, and certainly in 50 years, everyone will perceive it.
He was only off by 1 year.
If Israel, the plan to establish Israel was established prior prior to World War II, we have to ask ourselves, and if Germany was lost World War One, how did they become an industrial power in 30, 40 years in order to wage World War II against the whole world? How was Germany financed? Was the Holocaust an ends to a means in order for wealthier Jews to take and get the support of the world to steal Palestine?